Quick question. What do you think is the most common job in America right now? Software developer? Accountant? Maybe something in finance or management? The answer is none of those. The most dominant job across America's states in 2025 is fast food worker, the number one occupation in 17 states, more than a third of the country. A job that pays around $14 to $17 an hour. A job that involves taking orders, flipping burgers, and managing a lunch rush 6 days a week. And right behind it, retail cashier in 11 states, home health aides in 10 states. Today, we're breaking down the most common job in every single U.S. state using the latest data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I promise you, this map tells a story about the American economy that's a lot more interesting and a lot more complicated than you might expect. Let's get into it. Before we dive into the map, let's make sure we understand what we're measuring. This data comes from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, specifically their Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics Survey, released with data from May 2025. The BLS surveys hundreds of thousands of employers across the country every year to track how many people are employed in each occupation in each state. When we say most common job, we mean the single occupation with the most workers in that state, not the fastest growing, not the highest paying, the one where the most people actually show up to work every day. Now here's what makes this data so striking. The United States has the largest economy in the world, about $28 trillion in GDP. It's home to the world's most valuable technology companies, the most powerful financial institutions, the most prestigious universities. And yet, when you look at where the most Americans actually work, you find a workforce overwhelmingly concentrated in 3 types of jobs. Type 1, fast food and food service, number 1 in 17 states. Type 2, retail sales and cashiers, number 1 in 11 states. Type 3, home health and personal care aides, number 1 in 10 states. Now, nationally, if you count total workers across all states, home health and personal care aides are the single largest occupation with 4.3 million workers. Retail salespersons and fast food workers each come in at around 3.9 million, but state by state, meaning where the top job title is most widespread, fast food wins by a clear margin. And the median pay, fast food workers earn around $14 to $17 an hour, retail cashiers around $15 to $18, home health aides around $16 to $17. We're talking about some of the most common jobs in the most powerful economy on earth, paying wages that, in many cities, make it extremely difficult to afford rent, food, healthcare, and childcare simultaneously. That tension is the real story this map is telling. Let's start with the biggest color on the map, orange. Fast food workers and counter workers are the most common job in 17 states, more than a third of the country. These states are spread across the South, the Mountain West, and parts of the Midwest. Texas, with 461,000 fast food workers, is the largest single state by raw numbers for this category. Florida comes in at 333,000, Georgia at 145,000, Illinois at 195,000. These are enormous concentrations of workers in a single occupation. This is up from 15 states in 2024. Fast food's dominance is actually growing, and that's happening even as wages in the sector have risen in some states. California, for example, raised its fast food minimum wage to $20 an hour in 2024 and saw some interesting consequences. Restaurant owners raised prices, some locations cut hours and automation, things like AI-powered drive-through ordering systems and digital kiosks accelerated. In other words, higher wages didn't necessarily mean more security for the workers. But here's the thing about fast food work that often gets overlooked. It's not disappearing, not soon. Fast food and counter worker jobs are projected to generate more new openings than any other occupation in the entire economy over the next decade, around 904,000 openings per year on average through 2034. These jobs exist because Americans eat out constantly, because fast food chains are everywhere, and because making a burger still requires human hands. The deeper issue isn't the existence of these jobs, it's the pay. A fast food worker in Texas earning $14 an hour grosses around $29,000 a year before taxes, in a state where the median home price has crossed $300,000 and rent in major cities like Austin and Dallas runs $1,500 to $2,000 a month for a one-bedroom. That wage creates genuine financial hardship for millions of families. And yet onslaught that someone has to do it. As one economist put it simply, this is a service economy. The jobs are dictated by our wants and needs. So why does fast food dominate so many states? A few reasons. First, chains are everywhere, even in small towns and rural areas where other large employers don't operate. Second, the barrier to entry is very low, which means the workforce is large and constantly turning over. Third, the South and Mountain West have historically had lower minimum wages and weaker union presence, which keeps service sector employment high relative to other sectors. And fourth, manufacturing jobs that used to dominate these states have largely moved overseas or been automated away, leaving service work as the primary alternative for workers without four-year degrees. The second most dominant color on the map is retail sales workers and cashiers, who top the charts in 11 states. These states include some big ones: Colorado with 82,000 retail workers, Minnesota with 129,000, Wisconsin with 82,000, and Missouri with 109,000. New Hampshire, Vermont, Kansas, and others also fall into this category. Retail work and fast food work have a lot in common. Both require in-person presence. You can't stock a shelf or ring up a customer from home. Both pay relatively low wages, both have high turnover, and both are facing increasing pressure from automation and shifting consumer behavior. Online shopping has been eating into brick-and-mortar retail for over a decade. Amazon's rise has been well documented, and yet physical retail employment has proven more resilient than many predicted. Why? Because Americans still go to stores. They still want to try and clothes, walk around a grocery store, browse a hardware store with someone who can answer their questions. The death of retail has been repeatedly announced and repeatedly proven premature. That said, the job of cashier specifically is under real pressure. Self-checkout machines are everywhere. Some stores have experimented with cashier-free checkout entirely. The BLS actually projects that the cashier occupation will lose around 348,000 jobs by 2032, one of the largest projected absolute declines of any occupation. So while retail workers are the most common job in 11 states today, that picture could look quite different in 10 years. One interesting note, New Hampshire moved into the retail category this year, having previously been dominated by operations managers. That shift reflects a broader trend we'll talk about more: the decline of white-collar management roles as the most common jobs in various states. Now, let's talk about the most fascinating story on this map: the rise of home health aides. Home health aides dominate in 10 states, including 2 of the very largest: California with 970,000 workers and Massachusetts with 118,000. New York with 663,000, Pennsylvania with 257,000, Maryland with 97,000. These are coastal, urban, more affluent states. And the reason home health aides are the most common job there isn't complicated. These states have older populations, higher rates of healthcare coverage, and stronger state regulations that mandate more paid care for elderly and disabled residents. Nationally, home health and personal care aides are the single largest occupation in the entire country, 4.3 million workers as of May 2025. And the BLS projects that number will grow by 17% over the next decade, adding roughly 740,000 more workers by 2034. That's faster growth than almost any other large occupation. Why? 2 words: aging population. The baby boomer generation, roughly 73 million Americans born between 1946 and 1964, is now aged 61 to 79. This is the largest generational cohort in American history, and they are entering the years where healthcare needs become significant. Many of them want to age at home rather than in nursing facilities, and caring for them at home requires human workers, people who can sit with someone, help them bathe, remind them to take their medication, notice when something seems wrong. This is a job that is extraordinarily resistant to automation. You cannot send a robot to hold an elderly person's hand. You cannot automate the empathy required to care for someone with dementia. Home health aides represent a category of work that AI and robotics cannot easily replicate, and yet these workers earn around $16 to $17 an hour, around $34,000 to $35,000 a year, just slightly above the federal poverty line for a family of 4. One economist described the situation perfectly. One of the country's fastest growing jobs is also among its lowest paying. The demand for home health aides is enormous, the supply is tight, and the pay still hasn't risen to match the need. This creates a genuine policy challenge. If home health aides are underpaid, fewer people will want to do the job. But home health care is largely funded by Medicaid and Medicare, government programs, which means raising wages requires either government funding or cost shifts that affect families and patients. It's a structural problem with no easy answer, and it affects millions of vulnerable Americans who depend on these workers every single day. Now let's talk about the states that don't fit the big 3 categories, because they're genuinely interesting. North Dakota is the only state where freight movers, people who load and unload cargo, are the most common job. North Dakota's economy is heavily shaped by agriculture and energy extraction. The oil boom and the Bakken Formation transformed the state's workforce, and the movement of goods, grain, oil, construction materials, is central to that economy. Just 12,000 workers in that top category, reflecting how sparsely populated the state is, but the nature of the economy makes freight work uniquely dominant. Michigan is one of 4 states where operations managers are still the most common job, with 112,000 workers in that category. Michigan's economy remains deeply tied to manufacturing, particularly automotive manufacturing. General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis have their headquarters here. Managing complex manufacturing operations requires layers of management, which keeps operations manager employment high. Washington State is where software developers hold the top spot, with 107,000 workers. This should surprise no one. Seattle is home to Amazon, Microsoft, Boeing, and a dense ecosystem of technology companies. Washington has built one of the most concentrated technology workforces anywhere in the world, and it shows up clearly in this data. Alaska is one of only 2 states where registered nurses are the most common job, with 8,000 workers. Alaska's economy is unique. It's heavily dependent on resource extraction industries that are predominantly male. And healthcare is one of the sectors that provides stable, well-paying employment for a broader cross-section of the population. The sheer remoteness of many Alaskan communities also creates unusual healthcare needs that require more nurses per capita than most states. Wyoming is where assemblers dominate, with just 9,000 workers. Wyoming is the least densely populated state in the continental U.S. Its economy is built around energy extraction and ranching, and the manufacturing and assembly work that exists there tends to be tied to those industries. These outlier states are fascinating because they show what it looks like when a local economy is genuinely shaped by something other than service work. When geography, industry concentration, or historical development creates a genuinely different employment profile. Here's a trend buried in this data that I think deserves a lot more attention. In 2024, operations managers and specialists were the most common job in 10 states. In 2025, that number dropped to just 4 states. That's a 60% decline in 1 year. Idaho used to be dominated by operations managers. Now it's fast food workers. Texas, which has one of the largest and most economically diverse state economies in the country, similarly shifted toward fast food. New Hampshire went from operations managers to retail cashiers. What does this tell us? It could mean a few different things. One interpretation, the tech sector slowdown and corporate layoffs that have been happening since 2022 have reduced management-level employment. Companies like Amazon, Meta, Google, and Microsoft have all gone through significant rounds of layoffs in the past 2 years, cutting tens of thousands of white-collar workers. Those people don't all immediately find equivalent positions. Many end up in lower-level roles or drop out of the workforce temporarily. Another interpretation, service sector employment has grown faster than management employment, shifting the relative rankings even if the absolute number of managers hasn't changed dramatically. Either way, the direction of movement is worth noting. The most common jobs in America are moving down the wage ladder, not up. The fastest growing occupation in the country pays $16 an hour. The second and third most common occupations pay similar wages. And the management level jobs that used to represent a significant middle class employment base are becoming less dominant in the state by state rankings. This is the American labor market in 2025, a vast sea of in-person service work paying wages that make it genuinely difficult to build financial security, surrounded by a shrinking island of higher paid professional employment. Anytime we talk about low-wage routine jobs, the question of automation comes up. So let's address it directly. The jobs that appear most commonly on this map fall into 2 very different categories when it comes to automation risk. Cashiers and some retail roles are genuinely at high risk. Self-checkout is already widespread. Amazon has experimented with fully cashier-free stores. The BLS project's cashier employment will decline significantly over the next decade. This is a real structural shift that's already underway, and it will disproportionately affect workers without other skills or credentials to fall back on. Fast food work is in a more complicated position. Kiosks have replaced front-of-house ordering in many chains. AI-powered drive-through systems are being tested, but actually cooking food, managing kitchen operations, handling the unpredictable flow of a busy lunch rush, this still requires human workers in most contexts. Automation is nibbling at the edges of fast food work, but a full replacement is further off than the headlines sometimes suggest. That said, as wages rise, the economic incentive for chains to invest in automation increases. Home health aides, nurses, and direct care workers are at the lowest automation risk of any large occupation. Care work requires physical presence, emotional attunement, real-time judgment, and the ability to respond to unpredictable human needs. A robot can't tell when a patient seems more confused than usual, or when someone's breathing pattern has changed, or when a person who normally talks a lot has gone quiet. These are fundamentally human skills, and the demand for them is only growing. Software developers, like those in Washington State, are in an interesting position. AI tools have made individual developers significantly more productive. Some entry-level development work is being automated. But the design, architecture, and judgment work at the higher end of software development remains in high demand, and developers who can effectively use AI tools are becoming more valuable, not less. The bottom line, automation is not going to solve the problem of low-wage work dominating the American employment map. If anything, it's more likely to eliminate some of those jobs without replacing them with equivalent employment, leaving workers worse off, not better. Let's step back and look at the big picture. This map shows us that America in 2025 is fundamentally a service economy, and specifically a low-wage service economy for the majority of its workers. The most common job in 17 states requires no formal education and pays around $29,000 a year. The fastest growing large occupation in the entire country pays $34,000. The second largest, retail, is facing automation-driven job loss. At the same time, America is home to the world's most profitable technology companies, the most valuable financial institutions, and some of the highest-paying professional jobs anywhere on Earth. A software developer in Seattle can earn $150,000 to $200,000. A registered nurse earns around $93,000. an operations manager around $103,000. That the gap between those two worlds, the fast food worker in Texas and the software developer in Washington State, is enormous and growing, and this map is a visual representation of that gap. There are some genuinely difficult questions embedded in this data. Questions about the minimum wage. Should it be higher nationally? About healthcare. Should home health aides, who are often funded by Medicaid, be paid more? And where does that money come from? About education and training. Are there enough pathways for a fast food worker who wants to become a nurse or a developer to actually make that transition? About automation. As technology continues to reduce the number of certain types of jobs, what do we do with the workers displaced? None of these questions have easy answers, but what this data makes impossible to ignore is the sheer scale of the challenge. We're not talking about a small number of workers in low-wage jobs. We're talking about the most common occupation in 17 states, the largest single occupation in the country, tens of millions of Americans. The economy that this map describes is real. It's the economy that most Americans actually live in. And understanding it honestly is the first step toward thinking clearly about what comes next. So there you have it. The most common job in every U.S. state, broken down and explained. From California's 970,000 home health aides to Wyoming's 9,000 assemblers. From Washington's 107,000 software developers to North Dakota's 12,000 freight movers. From fast food dominating 17 states to retail holding 11. The map paints a picture of a workforce that looks very different from the image America often projects to the world. The data here comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Real numbers, real workers, real lives. A few things to sit with. The most common job in the biggest state pays $16 an hour. The fastest growing large occupation in the country pays similarly. White-collar management jobs are losing their dominance in state after state. And care work, the work of taking care of aging human beings, is simultaneously the most essential, the most irreplaceable, and among the most underpaid work in America. If this video gave you something to think about, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment. Does the most common job in your state surprise you? Is it what you expected? I'll see you in the next one.